I grew up believing I was part Cherokee. It was the foundation of my mother's entire identity, the cornerstone of her career, the story she told at every dinner party and speaking engagement. Dr. Rebecca Whitmore, celebrated Indigenous rights activist, award-winning author of Walking Two Worlds, A Cherokee Woman's Journey, director of the Native American Studies program at Columbia University. My mother was a celebrity in academic circles, a voice for marginalized communities, a bridge between cultures. She wore turquoise jewelry and told stories about her grandmother who'd walked the Trail of Tears. She spoke at rallies, advised politicians, secured millions in grant funding for Indigenous programs. And I was so proud of her. I was proud to be her daughter, proud to share that heritage, proud to carry forward the legacy she'd built. When my roommate Maya suggested we do DNA tests together for fun during our senior year at college, I didn't hesitate. I wanted to see the percentages, to understand exactly which tribes my ancestors belonged to connect more deeply with the identity my mother had taught me to cherish. The Ancestry Trace kit arrived on a Tuesday. Maya and I did the tests together in our dorm room, laughing as we spit into the tubes, betting on what surprising ethnicities might show up in our results. "I'm probably going to be like 2% Viking or something random," Maya joked. I smiled, secure in what I thought I'd find. My mother had told me our family was about 25% Cherokee. Her grandmother was half, making her a quarter, making me an eighth. The rest would be European, probably English and Irish like my father's side. I sealed up the tube and mailed it off, not thinking much about it. 6 weeks later, I got the email notification. "Your DNA results are ready." I was in the library studying for finals when I opened them on my laptop. The page loaded slowly, the Ancestry breakdown appearing piece by piece. 52% English, 31% Irish, 12% German, 5% Scandinavian. I scrolled down, looking for the Native American percentage. It had to be there. I refreshed the page. Nothing changed. 0% Indigenous American. 0% Cherokee. Not even a trace amount, not even the 1% margin of error. I stared at the screen, confusion turning slowly to cold dread. There had to be a mistake. The lab had mixed up my sample with someone else's. I logged out and back in, checked my account 3 times. The results were definitely mine. My name, my birthdate, my sample ID. But the numbers made no sense. I called my mother immediately, my hands shaking. "Mom, I did a DNA test and something weird came up. Can we talk?" She was in her office at Columbia. I could hear papers shuffling. "Honey, I'm about to go into a meeting. Can this wait?" I thought about lying, about pretending it could wait, but the words came out anyway. "The DNA test says I'm not Native American at all. Like, 0%. That can't be right, can it?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When my mother finally spoke, her voice was different. Tight. Careful. "Those tests aren't always accurate, Rebecca. They're just estimates. Don't read too much into it." But something in her tone made my stomach drop. "Mom, it didn't say 5% or 10% and the test missed it. It said 0. Not even a trace. How is that possible if your grandmother was half Cherokee?" Another pause. Then, "We'll talk about this when you come home for break. Not over the phone." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in the library, my textbooks forgotten, as pieces started clicking together in my mind. My mother's stories about her grandmother were always vague on details. We had no tribal enrollment, no connection to any specific Cherokee community. When I'd asked to attend a powwow once as a teenager, my mother had said we were culturally disconnected, and it wouldn't be appropriate. I'd never met any of her extended family. She said they'd died before I was born, that there were no cousins or aunts or uncles to visit. Her Cherokee identity had always been more theoretical than practical, more claimed than lived. But surely she wouldn't lie about something like this. Surely the woman who'd built her entire career on Indigenous advocacy wouldn't fabricate her own heritage. That would be monstrous. That would be career suicide. That would be the kind of betrayal that destroyed lives and reputations. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that there was a reasonable explanation, but my mother's reaction had been all wrong. If the test was just inaccurate, she would have laughed it off. Instead, she'd gotten defensive and hung up. Please make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because this story gets absolutely devastating. I couldn't wait until break to confront her. I bought a train ticket to New York that night and showed up at my mother's apartment the next morning. She answered the door in her bathrobe, her expression wary. "Rebecca, you should have called. I have a lecture in 2 hours." I pushed past her into the apartment. "We're talking now. Mom, tell me the truth. Are you actually Cherokee?" My mother's face went through several emotions: surprise, anger, resignation. She sat down heavily on her couch. "It's complicated." I felt my world tilting. "It's not complicated. Either your grandmother was Cherokee or she wasn't. Either we have indigenous ancestry or we don't. Which is it?" My mother looked at me with something like desperation. "My great-grandmother might have been part Cherokee. It was family lore. I grew up believing it. When I got to college and started studying indigenous issues, I connected with that part of my identity. It became important to me." I stared at her. "Might have been? Family lore? Mom, you've been telling people for 30 years that your grandmother walked the Trail of Tears. You've written books about your Cherokee heritage. You run a Native American Studies program. And you're telling me it's based on family lore?" She stood up, her voice becoming defensive. "I never lied. I believed what my family told me. And I've done real good with my platform. I've helped real indigenous people. I've secured funding for programs that make a difference." I pulled out my phone and showed her my DNA results. "Mom, look at this. 0%. Not 1%, not a trace amount. 0. That means your grandmother wasn't Cherokee. That means you aren't Cherokee. That means everything you've built your career on is a lie." My mother's face hardened. "You don't understand how these things work, Rebecca. Identity is more than DNA. It's about connection and culture and," I cut her off. "You can't claim a culture you don't belong to. You can't take opportunities meant for actual indigenous people. Mom, do you realize what you've done? You've been race-faking for 3 decades." The word hung between us, ugly and undeniable. My mother flinched like I'd slapped her. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I genuinely believed. At first, I believed. And then it became my career, my identity, and I couldn't just walk it back without destroying everything I'd built." I felt sick. "So you knew. At some point, you figured out you weren't actually Cherokee, and you just kept lying." My mother sat back down, and for the first time, she looked old. Defeated. "I started having doubts about 10 years ago. I tried to do genealogy research, trace my grandmother's family tree. I couldn't find any connection to Cherokee roles, any documentation. But by then, I'd published 2 books, I was directing a program, I was speaking at conferences. What was I supposed to do? Admit I'd been wrong? I'd lose everything." I stared at this woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me to value truth and integrity, who'd apparently been living a massive lie for my entire life. "When did you plan to tell me? When was I going to find out that my entire identity is fake?" She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Your identity isn't fake, honey. You're still my daughter. You're still the same person you were yesterday." I laughed bitterly. "No, I'm not. Yesterday I was Rebecca Whitmore, proud Cherokee woman, following in her mother's footsteps. Today I'm just another white girl whose mother committed fraud for career advancement." The accusations started tumbling out of me, faster and faster. "How many grants did you get based on being indigenous? How many speaking engagements? How many opportunities did you take from actual Native people because you were pretending to be one of them?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. "I've used those opportunities to help the community. I've been a good advocate." I stood up, unable to be near her. "You've been a fraud, Mom. And I'm the one who proved it. What am I supposed to do with that?" She looked up at me, mascara running down her face. "Please don't tell anyone. Please, Rebecca. It would destroy my career. Everything I've worked for would be gone. And there it was. Even now, caught in her lie, she was more worried about her reputation than the truth. I walked out of her apartment without another word. On the train back to school, I tried to process what I'd learned. My mother wasn't who I thought she was. My identity wasn't what I'd believed. The heritage I'd been proud of didn't exist. I felt unmoored, like someone had cut the strings holding me together. If you're finding this as shocking as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe. You won't believe what happens next. I told Maya everything that night. She listened in stunned silence, her eyes getting wider and wider. Your mom has been faking being Cherokee this whole time? Holy shit, Becca. That's insane. What are you going to do? I didn't know. I spent weeks wrestling with it. Part of me wanted to protect my mother, to keep her secret, to prevent the implosion that would come if the truth got out. But another part of me, the part that had been raised to value integrity, knew that staying silent made me complicit in the fraud. My mother called me every day. Have you told anyone? Please say you haven't told anyone. She sent me long emails explaining her side, justifying her choices, begging for understanding. I didn't respond. Then, 2 months after I'd confronted her, a journalist from the New York Times called me. Ms. Whitmore, I'm working on a story about Indigenous identity and academic fraud. I've received information that your mother may not be Cherokee as she claims. Would you be willing to comment? My blood ran cold. How did you get this information? The journalist's voice was professional, detached. I can't reveal my sources. But I've seen DNA evidence suggesting Dr. Whitmore has no Indigenous ancestry. Is that accurate? I thought about lying. I thought about protecting my mother one more time. Instead, I heard myself say, yes. I took a DNA test that showed 0% Native American ancestry. When I confronted my mother, she admitted she'd been claiming Cherokee heritage based on family stories that were never verified. The journalist was quiet for a moment. And you're willing to go on record with this? I closed my eyes. Yes. My name is Rebecca Whitmore. I'm Dr. Rebecca Whitmore's daughter. And I'm telling you that my mother has been lying about her Indigenous heritage for 30 years. The article came out 2 weeks later. Prominent Indigenous activist Dr. Rebecca Whitmore exposed as non-native, daughter's DNA test reveals decades of deception. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. My mother was placed on administrative leave from Columbia pending an investigation. Her publisher pulled her books from circulation. The Native American Studies program issued a statement saying they were deeply troubled by the allegations and conducting a thorough review. Speaking engagements were cancelled. Awards were rescinded. Organizations she'd worked with issued statements condemning her fraud. The Indigenous community she'd claimed to represent was rightfully furious. Actual Cherokee activists spoke out about the harm caused by people who fake Native identity. People like Rebecca Whitmore take resources meant for our communities, one woman said in an interview. She took a job that should have gone to an actual Indigenous person. She took grant money. She spoke for us when she had no right to. And she did it all while lying about who she was. My mother tried to defend herself in a public statement. I grew up believing I was Cherokee based on family stories. I later discovered this may not be accurate, but by then I'd dedicated my life to Indigenous advocacy. I've always acted in good faith and tried to use my platform to help Native communities. The response was swift and merciless. Good faith doesn't include continuing to lie for a decade after you knew the truth, one activist wrote. Good faith doesn't include taking opportunities from actual Native people. Rebecca Whitmore is a fraud, and she needs to face consequences. Within a month, my mother was forced to resign from Columbia. The investigation found that she'd claimed Native American status on grant applications, diversity initiatives, and employment documents. She'd secured nearly $3 million in funding specifically earmarked for Indigenous researchers. She was now being sued to return it. My relationship with my mother was destroyed. She blamed me for going public, for not protecting her, for choosing the truth over family loyalty. You ruined my life, she told me in one of our last conversations. Everything I built, everything I worked for, gone because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. I hung up on her. The truth was, she'd ruined her own life the moment she decided to fake an identity for personal gain. I'd just been the one to expose it. The media attention was overwhelming. I was interviewed on news programs, featured in think pieces about identity fraud and the harm of cultural appropriation. Some people called me brave for speaking out. Others called me a traitor for destroying my mother's career. I tried to explain that I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd simply told the truth. My mother had built her career on a foundation of lies. When that foundation crumbled, the whole structure came down. That wasn't my fault. That was hers. But it didn't make living with the consequences any easier. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see how this family completely falls apart. The legal consequences mounted. The universities and organizations that had given my mother grant money sued for fraud. The total amount she was liable for approached $4 million. She had to sell her apartment, liquidate her retirement accounts. She declared bankruptcy within 6 months of the story breaking. Her academic career was over. No institution would hire her now. Her books were out of print, her reputation destroyed. She'd become a cautionary tale, a symbol of everything wrong with identity fraud. And I was the daughter who'd exposed her. The Native American community I'd thought I belonged to made it clear I wasn't welcome. I'd grown up attending certain cultural events with my mother, believing I had a right to be there. Now I understood I'd been an interloper, someone participating in a culture that wasn't mine based on my mother's lies. I apologized publicly, but apologies couldn't undo decades of inappropriate presence in spaces that weren't meant for me. I changed my major from Native American Studies to history. I stopped wearing the turquoise jewelry my mother had given me. I stopped telling people I was part Cherokee because I wasn't. I was just a white girl whose mother had lied. My father, who'd divorced my mother years ago, called me after the story broke. I suspected something wasn't right, he admitted. Your mother could never provide documentation, could never connect us with her Cherokee family. But I never pushed it because she seemed so certain. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from this. I appreciated his apology, but it didn't change the fact that my entire childhood had been built on a fabrication. Every time my mother had told stories about our ancestors, she'd been lying. Every time she'd taken me to events and introduced me as her Cherokee daughter, she'd been committing fraud. And I'd believed her. I'd trusted her completely. The betrayal cut deeper than any academic scandal. This was my mother. The person who was supposed to teach me right from wrong, truth from lies. And she'd spent 30 years living a lie so convincing that even her own daughter hadn't questioned it until a DNA test proved otherwise. I went to therapy. My therapist helped me understand that my mother's choices weren't my responsibility, that exposing the truth was the right thing to do even if it hurt, that I was allowed to grieve the mother I thought I had while acknowledging the one who actually existed. Your mother prioritized her career over integrity, my therapist told me. She had multiple opportunities to come clean, when she first had doubts, when you were born, when you were old enough to understand. She chose deception every time. That's not on you. But knowing it intellectually didn't make it hurt less. I'd lost my mother, my heritage, my understanding of who I was. I had to rebuild my identity from scratch, without the Cherokee foundation my mother had taught me to value. A year after the scandal broke, my mother reached out. I'm sorry, her email said. I'm sorry for lying, for putting my career ahead of truth, for involving you in my deception. I know I can't undo the harm I've caused. But I want you to know I love you, and I hope someday you can forgive me. I read the email 3 times. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to repair our relationship, to find some way back to being mother and daughter. But I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She'd had 30 years to tell the truth, and she'd chosen lies. She'd built her entire identity on cultural appropriation and fraud. She'd taken opportunities from people who actually deserved them. And when caught, her first instinct had been to beg me to stay silent, to protect her career over doing what was right. Please like, share, and subscribe. This story shows why truth always matters. I didn't respond to her email. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my own life with honesty as the foundation. I graduated college and got a job as a researcher at a historical society. I made new friends who knew me as just Rebecca, without any claims to heritage I didn't possess. I dated someone who loved me for who I actually was, not who my mother had pretended we were. And slowly, painfully, I started to heal. The public eventually moved on to other scandals, other stories. My mother became a footnote, a cautionary tale occasionally referenced in articles about academic fraud. She moved to a small town in Oregon, as far from her former life as possible. She got a job teaching at a community college under her maiden name. She'd been effectively erased from the field she'd once dominated. Sometimes I wondered if she'd learned anything from the experience. If she understood the magnitude of what she'd done, the harm she'd caused to Indigenous communities and to me. Or if she still saw herself as the victim, the woman whose career had been destroyed by an unfortunate truth rather than her own choices. I suspected it was the latter. People who commit fraud that elaborate rarely fully accept responsibility for it. 2 years after the scandal, I got a message from a Cherokee woman named Sarah Running Deer. "I was supposed to get the position your mother held at Columbia," she wrote. "I was the other finalist. They chose her because they wanted Indigenous representation in leadership. I later found out I would have gotten it if not for her fraudulent claims. I just wanted you to know that what you did, exposing the truth, that took courage. You gave me and others like me justice, even if it came too late." I cried reading her message. This was what my mother's fraud had cost. Real opportunities for real Indigenous people. Sarah had lost a job she deserved. Other Native scholars had been passed over for grants my mother won. Indigenous students had been taught by someone who had no right to claim their culture. The harm was immeasurable, and my mother had caused it all while congratulating herself on being a good ally. I wrote back to Sarah, apologizing even though the fraud wasn't my fault. She responded with grace I didn't deserve. "You're not responsible for your mother's choices. You're only responsible for your own. And you chose truth. That matters." I framed her message and hung it in my apartment. On hard days, when I missed my mother or questioned whether I'd done the right thing, I'd read Sarah's words and remember why the truth had mattered more than protecting a lie. My mom had built her career on her heritage. One DNA test proved she was 100% faking it. The fallout destroyed her career, her reputation, her relationship with me. Some people said I was cruel for exposing her. That I should have protected family over principle. But I couldn't. Because the truth mattered more than my mother's comfort. Because actual Indigenous people deserved those opportunities she'd stolen. Because living a lie for 30 years didn't excuse it, it made it worse. My mother had choices at every step. She could have verified her heritage before building a career on it. She could have come clean when she first had doubts. She could have been honest with me before I took a DNA test. She chose deception every time, and when the truth finally came out, she chose to blame me rather than take responsibility. Today, 3 years after that DNA test, I'm building a life based on honesty. I don't claim heritage I don't have. I don't take credit for struggles I haven't faced. I don't pretend to be something I'm not for professional advancement. It seems like such a low bar, just be honest about who you are, but my mother couldn't clear it. She wanted the prestige and opportunities that came with Indigenous identity without actually being Indigenous. She wanted to be special, to be a voice for the marginalized, to be celebrated as a bridge between cultures. And she was willing to lie for 30 years to maintain that image. The saddest part is that she could have made a difference without the fraud. She was a talented scholar, a compelling speaker, a dedicated advocate. If she'd just been honest about being a non-native person passionate about Indigenous issues, she could have still contributed meaningfully. But that wasn't enough for her. She needed to be Cherokee. She needed that identity to define her, even if it was fake. I think about the irony sometimes. My mother spent 3 decades teaching about Indigenous struggles and cultural preservation while actively harming those communities through her fraud. She spoke about the importance of authentic representation while being the least authentic person in the room. She built a career on championing Native voices while taking opportunities from actual Native people. The hypocrisy was staggering. But it taught me an important lesson: intention doesn't erase harm. My mother genuinely believed she was helping Indigenous communities. She thought her advocacy work justified the lie about her identity. But good intentions don't make fraud acceptable. The harm she caused was real, regardless of what she meant to do. I haven't spoken to my mother in over a year. She still sends emails occasionally, asking how I'm doing, telling me about her new life, hinting that she'd like to rebuild our relationship. I don't respond. Maybe someday I'll be ready to have a conversation with her. Maybe someday I'll be able to separate the mother who raised me from the fraud who lied to me. But not yet. The wound is still too fresh, the betrayal too deep. What my mother did wasn't just lie to me. She built my entire identity on a foundation of fraud. She taught me to be proud of heritage I didn't have. She took me to cultural events I had no right to attend. She made me complicit in her deception before I was old enough to understand what was happening. And when the truth came out, she asked me to keep lying to protect her career. That's not what mothers do. That's not what people who actually value integrity do. So I told the truth, and I watched her world burn, and I don't regret it. Because some things matter more than family loyalty. Some things matter more than protecting someone you love from consequences they deserve. Truth matters. Justice matters. And people who fake their identity for 30 years don't get to demand silence when they're finally exposed. My mom built her career on her heritage. One DNA test proved she was 100% faking it. I exposed the fraud, and it destroyed everything she'd built. Some people call me brave. Some call me a traitor. I'm just someone who chose honesty over complicity. And I'd make the same choice again.